We've left Auto Tour Stop 2, Oak Hill, and headed south to Auto Tour Stop 3, called Oak Ridge, a position defended by Union troops of the 1st Army Corps on the afternoon of July 1st, 1863. Now, as we mentioned at our last stop, during that midday lull, reinforcements from both sides arrived on the battlefield. 8,000 Confederate infantrymen, led by Robert Rhodes, occupied Oak Hill and launched assaults against this position here, all of which were driven back. Union troops would get more reinforcements as well, and deploying in the fields just south of where I'm standing, north of the town of Gettysburg, would be roughly 5,000 infantrymen of the 11th Corps of the Army of the Potomac. These men were led by Oliver O. Howard, a major general from the state of Maine, and these 5,000 Union infantrymen were spread across the plain of north of Gettysburg in a heavy skirmish line, protecting the Mummersburg Pike, the road you see just behind me, the Carlisle Pike, and also the road to Harrisburg. But just as Union reinforcements arrived on the battlefield, more Confederate reinforcements would arrive on the battlefield. This time, 5,000 Confederates led by a general named Jubal Early, who just a few days before were not far from York, Pennsylvania. Jubal Early's Confederates will launch an assault at about 3:30, 4 o'clock in the afternoon against the Union defenders of the 11th Army Corps north of town and drive those troops back. At the exact same time, more Confederate troops launch an assault against the Union position west of town, the men of the 1st Army Corps, and they begin to fall back as well. By about 4 o'clock, 4:30 on the afternoon of July 1st, 1863, the Union defenders of Gettysburg, deployed west and north of town, begin to fall back into a retreat that descends into a rout and heads through the very streets of Gettysburg. The retreat is confusing and chaotic. Thousands of Union men are captured. Hundreds are killed and wounded. But if you're a Union soldier, and you survive the fighting north and west of town, and you manage to make it to the streets of Gettysburg, you get to Cemetery Hill. Again, the prominent tree line, the prominent hill, directly south of the town of Gettysburg today. Remember, in 1863, Cemetery Hill is completely clear of trees. Union defenders of Cemetery Hill are able to bring up artillery. They're able to reform their battle lines, so that by the end of the day, on July 1st, 1863, even though Union troops of the 1st and 11th Corps are driven back, even though they abandon the ground north and west of town, they still hold that commanding terrain south of town. They still control Cemetery Hill. And by the end of the day, they'll control Culp's Hill, the wooded hill just to the east or just to the left of Cemetery Hill. Now, Robert E. Lee wasn't on the battlefield most of the day on July 1st. He arrives on this ridge sometime around 4:30, just in time to witness these Union troops retreating through the town of Gettysburg and rallying on Cemetery Hill. Robert E. Lee didn't expect a battle to happen at Gettysburg, but a battle did happen. And now, how is Robert E. Lee going to react to it? As Lee debates this situation, the second in command of the Army of Northern Virginia arrives on the battlefield. This is Lieutenant General James Longstreet. Now, Longstreet's men weren't engaged on July 1st, but together, in the evening hours of the first day of the battle, Lee and Longstreet look at the Union position on Cemetery Hill, and they have to debate what to do. Now, James Longstreet, the last thing he wants to do is fight a battle at Gettysburg. He sees Cemetery Hill crowned with Union artillery, lined with Union troops, and what Longstreet wants to do is withdraw, disengage, try to outmaneuver the Union Army and fight the battle on ground that's more suited to defense, that's more advantageous to the Confederates. Robert E. Lee, though, came north to destroy the Union Army, to kill the Union Army. And on the evening of July 1st, 1863, Robert E. Lee sees the thing he wants to kill more than anything just south of the town of Gettysburg on Cemetery Hill. Longstreet would later write, at the end of that conversation, Robert E. Lee clenched his hand in a fist and pointed the fist at Cemetery Hill and said, "The enemy is there, and that is where I shall strike him." So if the Union Army is still on Cemetery Hill on July 2nd, Robert E. Lee is going to attack. The only question Lee has is where will he attack and how will he attack? Meanwhile, George Gordon Meade, commander of the Union Army, doesn't arrive on the battlefield till about midnight. But once he arrives at Gettysburg, he's in the saddle almost the entire night, riding up and down the Union battle line, moving troops into position as they arrive on the battlefield. And by dawn, July 2nd, 1863, everything hangs in the balance. A lot of times the fighting on July 1st, 1863 is overlooked in favor of the more famous aspects of the Battle of Gettysburg. Pickett's Charge, the fighting on Little Round Top. I think it's important to remember, though, that the fighting on July 1st, 1863 sets the stage for everything that will come after it. And even if the Battle of Gettysburg only lasted one day, even if the fighting only took place on July 1st, 1863, the fighting in the fields, woods, and hills that we've just visited would still rank as one of the bloodiest battles of the American Civil War. On July 1st, 1863, roughly 16,000 men will become casualties. 16,000 men killed, wounded, missing, and captured, stretching across the landscape behind me.